The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Donald Trump's ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, is resigning at the end of the year. This was announced yesterday. Trump and Nikki Haley actually did a press event at the White House, and it was all presented as everybody's on good terms. This is all very happy. Nikki's great. Everybody's great. But the truth is that Nikki Haley has actually been pretty critical of Donald Trump during her tenure as ambassador to the UN, at least compared to some of the other totally unconscious brown-nosers of Donald Trump. And according to what Trump said yesterday, he had known for 6 months that Nikki Haley wanted a break after this year. And everybody is just super happy about this, is what we were led to believe. But we know that Haley was sometimes at odds with Trump's third of three national security advisors, John Bolton. And this is, number one, a decision, a change that is likely going to lead to even more radicalization. And it's not that Nikki Haley was pro-UN in any broad sense of the term, by no means, but she is likely more friendly to the United Nations than whoever Donald Trump is going to end up naming as her replacement. And yesterday I did the story about the radicalization of American institutions. And what we're seeing is that American diplomacy continues to radicalize. When you add, as Trump certainly will, a more hostile to the United Nations ambassador, you are furthering this move to the right, this radicalization of American diplomacy. Now, as far as what the so-called real plan is here, there's a bunch of different speculation. I'll tell you some of the top hypotheses. Number one, there's the suggestion that there's going to be a really big shakeup in the Trump administration for 2020, and that Nikki Haley will ultimately run as Trump's vice president for 2020 for the re-election campaign as his running mate, and that Mike Pence will end up going to the cabinet, right? This is not what I think is going to happen necessarily, but this is one idea. Another idea is that Nikki Haley is being groomed to run for the Senate in 2020 in South Carolina. And there's actually some specific details about that. I got one email saying Trump is going to push Chief of Staff John Kelly out after the midterms, meaning in December, January, and install Nikki Haley as Chief of Staff, which doesn't ring particularly true to me, given that, again, Nikki Haley has been somewhat critical of some things that Donald Trump has said and done. Another idea would be that the reason for Nikki Haley leaving her UN ambassadorship is so that Lindsey Graham, who's a senator from South Carolina, can be rewarded for that totally unhinged Brett Kavanaugh rant at the hearings 2 weeks ago. And as UN ambassador, you then put Nikki Haley in as senator, filling in for Lindsey Graham for the remainder of his term. And then she runs in 2020. In 2020, Lindsey Graham's seat is up for re-election, and you would get her the power of incumbency by having her in there for a couple of years, and then she can actually run for that seat properly as the actual candidate in 2020. But for me, the most interesting possibility has nothing to do with Trump's plan for Nikki Haley. It just so happens, Pat, I don't know if you'll be surprised by this, I know many in our audience won't be, that Nikki Haley's resignation announcement, remember, she's not actually leaving till the end of the year, came the day after an ethics watchdog group requested an investigation into her flights on private jets. The watchdog group is claiming that she improperly disclosed, I think it's 6 or 7 flights on private jets on her 2017 financial disclosure. A lot of problems with private jet and first class jet travel for Trump people. And this is interesting timing, to say the least.
This is completely in line with what Tom Price did and what Steve Mnuchin did. But it could all just be coincidence. I mean, this will be 2 full years for Nikki Haley as the UN ambassador. Yeah. It's not like at the beginning of the Trump administration when people would leave after a month or two and we were wondering why are they leaving so early. I think there are fewer questions with this one.
There are fewer questions, but there are still questions.
There are questions.
And we know that a really good way to get federal ethics probes to go away is to resign. Now, she's not actually leaving until the end of the year, and how that would play into a possible ethics investigation is less clear. But Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington has filed a complaint. They want a full investigation into this. They want the Inspector General to explore these 7 flights on private jets paid for by 3 South Carolina businessmen. Did she resign yesterday or announce her resignation yesterday because of this? I don't know. What I do know is that it's too easy to get out of these ethics investigations by resigning. That's in no other world are you free to go. Like, if you get into your car before the police catch you and say, we want to talk to you about something, you say, I made it into my car. The police don't say, oh, you know, you did. You're in your car. We're not going to talk to you. We're not going to explore what it is we think you did wrong. That's basically the way it works with federal officials and these ethics investigations. So anyway, which is the most likely explanation? I don't know. But Nikki Haley is going bye-bye, and there are important policy implications, which relate to the question of how Trump is going to have a replacement influence the relationship of the United States with the UN, which, to use Trump's word, is an increasingly beleaguered relationship, and this really matters. And lastly, let me throw in, could Donald Trump be thinking of replacing Nikki Haley with his own daughter, not Tiffany, it seems he can't stand Tiffany at all, Ivanka Trump? Could Ivanka Trump be Trump's idea of the next ambassador to the United Nations? He couldn't. They wouldn't let him, right? Well, let's talk about that next. In the continued authoritarian nepotist, is that a word? Cronyistic slide, Donald Trump, in the wake of the announcement of UN Ambassador Nikki Haley's resignation for unknown and questionable reasons, possibly involving a federal ethics probe that's been requested, Donald Trump has said that there could be no one more competent in the world to replace UN Ambassador Nikki Haley than his own daughter, Ivanka Trump. Now, you probably are hearing me say this, and you're thinking, David, you must have misunderstood. It must be an Onion article or a really good impression on SNL. It can't really be that Trump said something like this. Oh, no, it's on video. That's exactly what Donald Trump said. Take a look at this.
I've heard a lot of names. I've heard Ivanka. I've heard, how good would Ivanka be? The people that know, there's nothing to do with nepotism, but I want to tell you, the people that know that Ivanka would be dynamite. But, you know, I'd then be accused of nepotism, if you can believe it, right?
Can you believe it?
I think Ivanka would be incredible. That doesn't mean I'd pick her, because you'd be accused of nepotism. Even though I'm not sure there's anybody more competent in the world, but that's okay. But we are looking at numerous people.
I like that. You know, Ivanka, my own daughter would be the best person to actually be ambassador to the UN. But if you can believe this crazy thing, I'd be accused of nepotism. Yeah, I can believe it. That's the definition of nepotism.
Well, I'm going to defend the president here for a second, because in Trump's circles, perhaps Ivanka is the most competent one. Like,
Maybe
he had
so.
people like Scaramucci working for him, and Kellyanne Conway, and Sean Spicer. Ivanka's better than all of them.
But he said not the most qualified in D.C. or in my administration. He said the most competent in the world. I love how he says nepotism, like, forgetting about nepotism for a second, Ivanka would be the best, but people would say nepotism. So that's the problem. The problem is not that he immediately starts thinking about, could I put a member of my family in this position maybe? He goes to, it would be something that the left would slam me for, unfairly, of course. Would Ivanka Trump be considered as ambassador to the UN, as a possibility, by any other president, or even by any other person outside of Trump's family, were Trump not president? The answer is no. She would only even enter someone's mind as a possible ambassador to the UN on the basis of being Trump's kid, which means, of course, that it is nepotism. And I'm going to tell you right now, I know people in the audience may not like this. If Donald Trump wants Ivanka as ambassador to the UN, Trump probably gets Ivanka as ambassador to the UN, right? The debasement of our politics and of all that is good and proper means Trump probably wouldn't be stopped. I mean, who would do it? Are Republicans in the House or Senate going to punish Trump for making Ivanka ambassador to the UN? No. If Trump wants her in there, like, I'm not saying he actually wants her in there, but if he did, Fox and Friends would start talking about, why not Ivanka? She knows everybody. She's well-liked. She's respected. I mean, great person, great body. Trump has told us about her great body many times. It was weird when he said it, but he did. I don't think they stop it if Trump really wants this.
I mean, there are anti-nepotism laws on the books, but they could skirt around them. That's how they got Ivanka into the White House as an advisor.
Unpaid.
You just don't pay her.
Yeah.
And I think that's a sacrifice she would be willing to make.
This would be different. This seems as though it would go against 5 U.S. Code subsection 3110 about the employment of relatives. But who cares? Because it hasn't mattered so far. And the law says that during a national security crisis, the president all of a sudden can appoint a relative. They'll say, there are Mexicans pouring in. It is a national security crisis. Therefore, Ivanka as ambassador to the UN. Or the Russia probe is a national security crisis. We've got to put Ivanka Trump in as ambassador to the UN.
And Ivanka Trump, she knows China. She knows Japan.
Absolutely.
She knows India. She's the perfect fit.
I would say don't stop here. I would say go further. Donald Trump Jr. for Secretary of State. Get the North Korea thing straightened out once and for all. Pompeo's failing. Put in Don Jr.
Barron Trump can be head of cybersecurity
of course.
policy. And Tiffany Trump, maybe like deputy press secretary, but none of the
He really
big
doesn't
stuff.
like her.
Yeah.
Trump really doesn't like Tiffany, does he?
No.
This is the third ring of the circus, okay? It's all coming full circle. We've got the debasement of our politics and culture to grotesque lows. We've got, as I mentioned twice now in the last 48 hours, the radicalization of institutions of government, including the Supreme Court, including the Environmental Protection Agency, our voting systems, the courts, media, and then the fully authoritarian, I would call it a denouement, of officially pushing his family into positions of power. Official positions, not just, I have an office near daddy's and I hang out but nobody pays me. We're in real trouble. You had better vote next month. Seriously. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and we'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's say some thank yous. Why not thank people? Gratitude, appreciation, etc. I ran out of other adjectives. Philip Friedman is today's David Pakman Show member of the day. This is a program. When you see the show and you see that we have, well, you don't see the cameras, but you can infer that there's a camera in the room because I'm being recorded. When you see TVs behind me and microphones, this is not funded by big corporations. It's actually funded mostly by people in our audience through membership. Thanks to Philip for being today's new member of the day. Also want to say a big thank you to Danielle Gaudette, who has been a David Pakman Show member dating all the way back to 2013. More than 5 years of membership for Danielle. Philip, Danielle, thank you. Join them as members at www.joinpakman.com. Just about 4 weeks, 4 weeks minus a day. For the coupon code, VoteSoon18. VoteSoon18 as a membership coupon code saves you 40%, but it ends on the day of the midterms. So take advantage of that now. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. It is time for Hatriot Mail. If you've never heard Hatriot Mail, here's a preview of what we mean by Hatriot Mail.
So what if the president's been accused of sexual harassment 15 times? Or that he paid hush money to a porn star?
Right.
At least he never wore a tan suit. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
So sometimes Hatriot Mail is homophobic. Sometimes Hatriot Mail attempts to emasculate me or emasculate Pat or emasculate our audience. Sometimes Hatriot Mail is anti-Semitic. Sometimes Hatriot Mail is conspiratorial and references various conspiracy theories. Today's is all of those things in one. Let's take a listen to it.
David Pakman is a tool of the NWO. Everything he stands for is anti-America. I'm convinced this worm has no testing clays. Look at his limp wrists flopping all over the place. David has actually been busted several times before. Such a shilling shekel homage.
So the anti-Semitism is talking about shekels, right? Of course, the new Israeli shekel, NIS, is the currency of Israel. So Pat, you didn't even know this.
I didn't know that.
Naive, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed Pat didn't realize that when people talk about shekels, about 90% of the time, it is a sort of thinly veiled anti-Semitic reference of some kind. So that's the anti-Semitism here, talking about me shilling for shekels or whatever. Homophobia is saying I'm a limp-wristed homoj, H-O-M-O-J, which I think is just a typo. So we've got homophobia. Emasculation, claiming I have no testicles, which I think means testicles, but just, again, misspelled.
Probably,
okay.
Yeah.
And then conspiracy theories, right? Referencing the NWO, which if you don't know about that, it's the New World Order, also kind of intertwined with Alex Jones, One World Government, conspiracies. So this is hitting all four of those highlights, I guess.
That's amazing. This may be the best Hatriot Mail of all time. You have all the bases covered.
In relatively few words, actually. It's quite pithy in a sense.
Yeah, but he says you've been busted several times before.
As a gay
I don't know
guy,
what that
I
means.
think he means.
Oh, as a gay guy.
I've been busted as gay, as if that's something that, like, if you're gay, you've been caught is the idea, I think, underlying this, where it's something that one would try to, it's like getting caught having committed a crime. In the mind of many Hatriots, being gay would be something you would try to hide, and you could be caught being gay. This is in their mind, by the way. I don't want this taken out of context and one of those highlight reels made of where it sounds like I'm saying these things. Nobody would ever do that in our audience, of course. Okay, if you want to make the Hatriots cry, if you want to send a middle finger to the Hatriots, you can use the coupon code HATRIOT40 for any membership at www.joinpacman.com, and that will save you 40%, and 177 Hatriots will cry every time you do that. So I suggest you do that. HATRIOT 40. Okay, let's move on. Breaking news. A black man babysitting two white kids had the cops called on him and was questioned by the police. You're probably waiting for the rest of the story, like, oh, well, what did this guy do that was suspicious? Or had the children been reported missing? Or was the black man seen beating the white kids in public? There's no more story. Like, I've told you the whole story. A black guy was babysitting two white kids, and the police were called by a white woman in Georgia who called and said, there's a black man with two white kids. Come talk to the black guy, apparently is what she said. She saw them outside of a Walmart in Cobb County. The man's name is Corey Lewis. He's the black babysitter who was asked by the woman to speak to the children. The guy said what most parents or caretakers or guardians would say if a random stranger comes up to you in a parking lot and says, I want to talk to these kids you're with. He said, no. You can't talk to these kids. So she called the cops, followed the guy in her vehicle as he left the Walmart parking lot. Police officer shows up, talks to the guy, talks to the kids, calls their parents, and the parents say, yeah, the black guy's our friend, and he's babysitting our kids. The mother is named Dana Mango. I kind of like that last name. Maybe it's because I love mango so much, but I like that last name, Mango.
You could be David Mango.
I actually, the David Mango show has a nice ring to it. Dana Mango said to local news station WGCL that the police officer straight up told her the black guy was questioned because we received a call about a black man driving around two white kids. That was the basis for the call. And there's an article in People about this. The mom said, I asked the police officer, are you telling me that because there's an African-American male driving my two white kids, he was stopped and questioned by police? And the officer said, I'm sorry, ma'am. That's exactly what I'm saying. We have video of this.
She saw you at
Take a look.
Walmart.
I was at Walmart, yeah. I got two kids I'm babysitting. We ate at Subway at Walmart. Went and got some gas. She pulled up talking about are the kids okay? Why wouldn't they be okay? No one's yelling, no one's screaming, no one's trying to run away. She left, came back, and said, and asked to see the little girl so she can ask her if does she know who I am.
Yeah.
All right. And then I went over to get some gas at Murphy's.
Okay.
She came back there and stayed there.
Echo Lima, India 00.
You mind if I talk to him?
That's crazy.
I know, but you mind if I do?
I mean, why?
So that, what you heard at the end, first you heard a black guy just explaining why it's not a concern of law enforcement that a black man is with 2 white kids, right? That's the context. That's what this guy was explaining. They're with me. They know me. Nothing's going on. They're not screaming. They're not crying. At the end, what you hear is the officer insisting on talking to the kids. And Corey Lewis says, that's crazy. Nothing's going on here. And the cop insists on talking to the kids. We're not going to, even though the video is out there, I don't want to put the kids in the video. Okay. So we're going to skip past that. The officer in the interim time that we're skipping over has spoken to the kids, which I don't want to include. And then this is sort of how the thing wraps up, just the last few seconds of this video.
No, I'm letting the world know like what's really going on. It's 2018. I can't even step out into the community without being profiled.
Okay, dude, I'm not doing anything. I'm not.
Right.
It's just a call we get. All right.
That's ridiculous.
It is what it is.
The guy was babysitting while black. Yeah. Babysitting while black is what was going on here.
I suppose the cop did an okay job here. He is responding to a call after all, so he has to interview some people. My biggest takeaway, though, was the cop seemed very unenthused by the whole thing. Like, maybe he should find another profession, because he just didn't seem very into it.
I want to think about another element of this. How would the woman who called the police have reacted if a random person came up to her at Walmart and demanded to speak to her kids, as if that's a normal thing to do? If random strangers come up to most parents and totally out of context say, I'd like to speak to your children, most parents would say no. This is just racism. It's racial prejudice. We don't need to do an overly complex analysis of what's going on here. And in fact, if I was the babysitter, I would have called the police. He's being confronted by a stranger in a public place. He is at this point, he's in charge of these kids. He's the guardian for these kids. Stranger is confronting him and demanding to speak to those children. He doesn't know who she is. And then she follows him home in a vehicle, which is intimidatory without question. I actually have a friend who's black here in Massachusetts, and his wife is white. And they have 2 kids. And one of the kids looks much more Caucasian, whatever we, interpret that however you want, than the other. He's never been confronted by anybody, but he has told me stories of perceiving tension and sort of strange looks when he's with just like the more Caucasian looking kid without the wife. And that's Massachusetts. So imagine what it's like in places like Georgia and Mississippi and other parts of the country. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And you'd have to imagine that this woman isn't calling the cops anytime she sees kids with parents of any color. Of course not. Like if it's white kids with white parents, she's not calling the cops. No. If it's black kids with black parents, she's not calling the cops. I assume.
This is the only scenario where she decides to call the cops.
Right. If she saw, I don't know, a white parent, a white adult with 2 Asian kids, is she calling the cops? I don't think so. No. I don't think she is. Send me your thoughts about this story. Make sure that you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram, @David Pakman Show. We have a great behind-the-scenes picture that we're going to be posting of what the setup around me looks like, and just kind of like a zoomed out, it's a kind of a shot where you don't see what's going on around me, but we have actually a picture we're going to be posting where you will see it. So follow the show on Instagram @David Pakman Show. Follow me on Instagram @David.Pakman. Yesterday, I was actually interviewed for a very interesting documentary film about the current administration. And I posted some behind-the-scenes pictures of that. A very, very compelling stuff happening on Instagram is the point. We'll take a quick break. Back after this with Nathan J. Robinson. Very, very interesting.
The David Pakman Show @DavidPakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Nathan J. Robinson, who's the editor of Current Affairs, author of several books, including The Current Affairs Rules for Life and Trump Anatomy, of a monstrosity. We'll talk first a little bit about our newest Supreme Court Justice, Brett Kavanaugh. Nathan, you write in an article, which I found very interesting, that there's sort of another whole set of issues here that are separate from the sort of adjudication of what happened with Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and other women years ago, which is the fact that Brett Kavanaugh has lied a bunch of times during the most recent and prior hearings, and that regardless of the truth or falsity of the sexual assault claims, that alone is a very good reason for him not to be on the court. So talk a little bit about how you sort of conceived of this article.
Yeah, it was a little odd to me because the focus of a lot of the discussion was on figuring out whether Brett Kavanaugh had, in fact, assaulted Christine Blasey Ford and whether there was enough evidence and what the standard of proof should be. And that all is important. But there was another issue, which is that when you looked at Kavanaugh's testimony, a lot of the things he said were simply manipulative or untrue. And if that's the case, if it's the case that a judge who is under oath and is testifying before the Senate says things that are not true or misleads the Senate, that really should end the issue. It's very serious, right? So as I looked through the testimony, I thought, well, people aren't zeroing in on some of the really important ways in which Kavanaugh misrepresented the truth. And that if we just discuss that, if it's provable, and I think it is provable, then it doesn't matter if you prove the allegations or not, because he should be disqualified.
I want to talk about Republicans in a second. First, we'll talk about how Democrats handled this. Bernie Sanders did write a letter where he said he wanted the potential perjury stuff looked into. But beyond that, tell me if I'm wrong, I didn't really see a clamoring from Democrats in general to focus in on the fact that the guy appears to have lied.
No, I think this was a mistake. I think Democrats spent a lot of the hearings pushing for an FBI investigation, which they should have known would be flimsy at best. And I think they got caught up in this question of what happened that night in the early 80s, and what did Brett Kavanaugh do this, and making the argument that the evidence was sufficient to where he should be off the court. And they didn't, as I say, they didn't focus in on the fact that he misrepresented a number of crucial things, right? He said that all of the people that Christine Ford says were there said the event didn't happen. Well, that's just false. One of them says she actually believes Ford. He said that he never attended an event with the people that she alleges the event was with. And if you look at the calendars that he submitted as evidence, he did, in fact, attend an event.
The calendars.
There was this awful one where he said he was asked about the way they made fun of this girl in high school and sort of suggested that she slept around, and he said, "Oh no, we never suggested that." Well, it's actually very, very clear that they did. They even wrote a poem about how easy she was, and there are other students now who have come out and said, no, he was lying about that. They were definitely making fun of her about sex, and he denied it under oath, and you can't do that, or you shouldn't be able to do that if you're a federal judge.
So on the one hand, I agree that Democrats did sort of make this mistake by pushing for the FBI investigation into sort of the idea of adjudicating what did or didn't take place in the early 80s. At the same time, that was the only thing that even delayed the confirmation the week that it did. I think that there's a possibility that if they focus from the beginning on the possible perjury, that you don't even get a delay and he ends up confirmed even earlier.
Yeah, but the timing of his confirmation doesn't matter that much if he's going to be confirmed. I mean, I think he was going to be confirmed no matter what. The question is, what can you do when you know that they have the votes to confirm him? And I think you would have had a higher chance of getting some of the, quote, moderate Republicans to be a little warier about confirming him if you had gone hard on the it's provable that he said things that were not true angle. I think that would be harder for them to deal with. They had an FBI investigation to point to cover their vote. They can't really do that so much if you just lay out the perjury thing before the American public very, very clearly. And it's also a really good way of building clear public support. And I think it's really hard for Republicans to defend.
There is a mechanism through which, as a Supreme Court justice, he could be removed or impeached, and it requires a majority of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. Democrats may well have a majority in the House starting in January, depending on the results less than 4 weeks from now. 2/3 of the Senate is not going to happen, and quite frankly, I just don't see any way in which, even if you prove that he lied, that you get whatever number you need, 14 or however many Republicans to say, yeah, we're going to go ahead with this.
Yeah, you're not actually going to get him impeached and removed from office. I think if you do emphasize impeachment and you use that as a sort of slogan, you're doing it not because you think you can actually get it done, but because it's important to make clear that he's not a legitimate Supreme Court justice, that he ought to, it calls into question all of his rulings. He's always kind of a justice with an asterisk next to his name. And the American people come to see him as a justice who ought to be removed. And you shouldn't emphasize the impeachment. What you should emphasize is the fact that he warrants impeachment, that this is a guy who really, if we were evaluating this in a sort of fair-minded manner, just shouldn't be on the court. And if you can build public consensus around that, that really helps the Democratic Party to make its case in elections that that they are the ones who are going to treat the court as it should be treated.
Does it, though? Because while I agree with you on the politics and the underlying analysis, it's not going to really successfully be done in advance of this November. And then do you really think that pushing the fact that Kavanaugh lied during his 2018 hearings would help Democrats in 2020? Like, I just think people will have forgotten about it and they won't care.
No. Not on its own, but I think as part of you have to build everything into a narrative, and narratives are what win elections. And this is a small part of the narrative that Democrats should be thinking. Well, what is going to show people that we're right, and that we ought to be voted for? And I think saying, look, Republicans will put a perjurer on the court if it helps further their political agenda and they don't actually care about their principles and values, and use that as one in a series of examples of that. I think that can actually be persuasive. No, I don't think impeach Kavanaugh should be the slogan for 2020. But I don't think you should let it go, because I think it is a pretty powerful thing and it's pretty easily provable.
So the narrative and the values are something I want to touch on next with you from a sort of cultural perspective. It's abundantly clear to me and to many who have been following the so-called value-based politics of the American Republican Party for a while that the values aren't real values. They're basically ways to get people to either donate to you or to vote for you. Like abortion's always been a great example, which is we know how to reduce the number of abortions, but Republicans don't want to do it because it doesn't fall in line with their values, which is access to contraception, comprehensive sex education, etc. Here, they've been able to say that even though it appears as though the alleged actions of Kavanaugh might go against their stated values, the value that they are defending is innocent until proven guilty. You've not definitively proven his guilt, and thus it is in line with their values to say we can't stop him from being on the court. Do you agree that this is like one of the most successful elements of the American right, which is no matter what happens, they can craft a narrative that appears to fit into their stated values?
Well, they're brilliant at doing politics. I mean, I have to give them credit. They always win. I mean, they've been winning all around the country. All the state legislatures, even in blue states, are falling. State governorships. They're excellent at selling people on these phony values. Whether it is, as you say, abortion, where it's like, well, most women say that they get abortions partially for economic reasons. They can't afford a child, and yet you're not going to have paid family leave policies. or whether it's this stupid innocent until proven guilty thing, which it's interesting because you never hear about innocent until proven. It's the ACLU and the public defenders who are always talking about the horrors of the criminal justice system and what happens when people are accused and tried without due process. Yeah, it falls apart under scrutiny because you say, okay, well, innocent until proven guilty, sure, but what if we think there's a 20% chance that this guy did it? Would you be comfortable in putting that person on the court if you think there's any chance that he did it that's reasonable? Or, look at the perjury. But they say it's catchy, and they're good at pushing it. Innocent until proven guilty. How do you oppose innocent until proven guilty? No corroborating evidence. And that's kind of persuasive people. They go, oh, yeah, no corroborating evidence, innocent until proven guilty. So, yeah, we need to get better at politics.
I've been reading some very interesting books on law enforcement and police interrogation, because I think there's a lot of analogies there to political debate, interestingly enough. And one of the points I see made time and time again is when you're trying to persuade someone of something, whether it's to confess to a crime or to see your point of view on a political issue, whatever, we tend to argue on the basis of our values rather than the values of the person that we're trying to persuade. And so talking about economic inequality in terms that resonate to the left won't necessarily influence somebody on the right because they might just have totally different values. So do you have a sense, and you can pick a particular political issue, or we can talk about the Kavanaugh thing, or really whatever way you want to go, what are some ways that the left can appeal to the right's values without sort of giving up their position on what they see as the important values either, if that makes sense?
Well, I would actually take the opposite approach. I think you got to be very careful about not. I've read an article called "Don't base left-wing arguments on right-wing premises."
Interesting.
And I talk a lot about things like where you adopt the right's values, and I think it's actually a mistake a lot of the time to try and make the case for left-wing ideas without making the case for left-wing values and saying. One of the examples of this that I use is that everything is phrased in terms of saving money. And they say, well, this will make the left often talks about criminal justice like this. While, the death penalty, for example, is really expensive. It costs a lot of money. And they say, well, so if you want the government to save money, you should oppose the death penalty. Now, really, that's not why we oppose the death penalty on the left. We oppose it because we don't think the state should be killing people who don't pose the threat anymore. But we say it saves money. Well, first, that's not even a very persuasive argument because a good way to save money is to execute people immediately after trial, which I'm sure get rid of all the appeals. But also, it's when you make a case that is on grounds that are not the real reason that you support a thing, you can sound kind of dishonest. And I actually think it's much harder to make the case for left-wing values when people don't share those values. But I think you shouldn't be trying to persuade people who have committed and unyielding conservative principles and say, well, actually, our policies follow conservative principles.
But so then what do you do, right? Because if your values are different than theirs, so they're certainly not going to come around to your values. And at the same time, you shouldn't show how there might be a way in which your values and their values could lead you down to the same policy in the end. Then what do you do?
Well, the question is who you're talking to, right? And the fact is that more people don't vote than vote for either one of the two parties. So I don't think you should be. I don't think you should cast your appeal to people who have inflexible conservative values. You should be trying to talk to people who do kind of share your underlying sympathies or could be brought around to it, but are not particularly politically active. The fact is that, left values, I happen to think, are shared by the majority of people. I think polling data kind of suggests that. I think most people are generally empathetic and can be. I would prefer to try and sell people on my understanding of criminal justice rehabilitation, which is that like I believe in people and I think people need second chances, than to try and persuade people on a cost-saving argument. There are people that I can't convince with that because they'll just dismiss me out of hand, but there are other people who will be more persuaded by that because they'll understand that I'm being honest, and I'm present. This is why a lot of people like Bernie Sanders, even if they're less. There's a group of people who are, even people who vote kind of conservative, who will respect Bernie Sanders more than they respect, say, Hillary Clinton, because they think, well, I disagree with him more, but he's more honest, and so I trust him more.
That's a good place to pause. We are speaking with Nathan J. Robinson, editor of Current Affairs, author of several books, and tomorrow we will continue our conversation with him about the intellectual dark web, so-called, as I say.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
One of the most prominent Senate races this November is incumbent extremist, vile, disgusting, depraved, dilapidated, I might even say. Does that make sense? Texas Republican Ted Cruz against Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke. We've been talking about this one. It's a tough one. Taking out an incumbent Republican in Texas is an uphill battle. But if you were able to remove such a toxic and ridiculous Republican, it would be a huge victory. It would be an absolutely massive victory. And what we learned early this morning is that Ted Cruz is declining to participate in a town hall debate with Beto O'Rourke on CNN on October 18th. They have debated already. It didn't go super well for Ted Cruz, although it was a lot of preaching to the choir. Like, I don't know that minds were necessarily changed by that first debate.
I don't think that Beto did all that well either. He just sounded like a typical politician, could have attacked at different points. It was 50-50.
I don't know if it moved the needle, but Ted Cruz is opting not to participate in this town hall debate. His campaign was asked why he's not participating in this one. They haven't, as of this morning, commented. And so what that means is that Beto O'Rourke is going to get a 1-hour live town hall with voters on CNN. Ted Cruz simply isn't going to be there. Now, that may actually help Beto O'Rourke. That might actually make a difference. I will say that Ted Cruz isn't just avoiding all debate with Beto O'Rourke. He already debated with him once. There's another debate scheduled for 2 days prior to the town hall on October 16th in San Antonio, if Cruz shows up, and as far as we know, he is planning to. So there's kind of two major storylines about why might Ted Cruz decline an opportunity for a 1-hour national media appearance with his opponent. The right is saying Ted Cruz has no reason to do this many debates. He's killing it in the race. There's a new New York Times poll which says Cruz is up 9 against Beto O'Rourke, 53-44 with 3% undecided, which if you believe this thing's basically over, Ted Cruz is going to win and be reelected. If you believe that you're up 9, you might just say, I don't need to do 2 debates in a three-day span. I just don't need to do that. There's also a level of possible hypocrisy here because in 2016, Cruz criticized Trump for canceling a presidential debate to raise money for veterans or something like that. Remember when Ted Cruz said this?
Donald Trump has decided not to participate in the Fox News debate this upcoming Monday. You were ready to go. John Kasich was ready to go. Kasich said he's not going to go if Trump's not going. And your response to Mr. Trump's decision?
Well, Megan, it's great to be with you. And for whatever reason, it seems that Donald Trump finds you a very, very terrifying person. He skipped the debate in Iowa because you were going to be moderating. And I guess he doesn't like when anyone challenges him. You know, he was saying just a week ago that he was eager to get one-on-one with me. Well, this debate, the field is narrowed even more, and he could have had a direct debate with me, and yet Donald apparently is ducking. He's afraid of being challenged.
Okay, so we've got Ted Cruz's position on debates. We've got the Republican idea that Cruz doesn't need to debate because he's up 9. Do I think that Cruz is actually up 9? Probably not. I think Democrats need to get out in Texas. I'm not pretending this is an easy one. Texas hasn't voted for a Democratic presidential candidate since '76. No Democrat has won statewide office in Texas since 1994. But the left wants to believe that the reason Ted Cruz isn't debating is that the first debate was such a disaster for him, that it did so much damage, that he thinks he's better off simply not showing up to the town hall. I don't really buy that. I don't really buy that that's why Ted Cruz isn't showing up.
Yeah, I don't think he's afraid of not knowing what he's talking about or Beto catching him in any traps, that sort of thing. I think he's just afraid of some sort of gaffe, right? That's what these people try to avoid. And if you're up by 9 points, why do you have to subject yourself to that possibility?
So let's explore whether he's really up 9, okay? There are internal polls, which we've learned about from sources inside Ted Cruz's campaign, which say that this is not a 9-point spread, that the possibility of this race being within the margin of error is a very real possibility. So I believe that the reality is probably a combination of the two. On the one hand, you do have public polling showing Ted Cruz way ahead, but most of those public polls are based on what's called the likely voter model. And what that does is it assesses the likelihood that a voter is actually going to vote. And it only is a poll of those that the model determines are likely to vote. Young people are underrepresented in likely voter models because one question that you're asked in determining your likelihood of voting is, have you voted before? If you're 18, 19, 20, or 21, and you were not 18 at the time of the last election, you haven't voted before, therefore you are less likely to vote according to these likely voter models. The young people are undercounted. So I think the Cruz campaign knows this. I think they know that they have internal polls that show that this is much closer. It doesn't look nearly as good for Cruz as the 9-point lead that the New York Times claims that he has. There has also been record high turnout for Democratic registration in Texas and Democratic primary turnout, the highest in 24 years. So if you do a more nuanced analysis of the polling data from Texas, you look at new voter registrations, you look at likely voter models and understand how that probably is hurting Beto O'Rourke in the polls, this actually could be much closer than 9 points. Do I think that Beto O'Rourke is clearly in the lead? No. At the best case scenario is that it's within the margin of error right now.
And I think it's safe to say that if Beto O'Rourke does pull this off, we're going to be seeing a huge blue wave in the 2018 midterms. That would mean that Democrats are taking the Senate and they had a strong night.
Yeah, it wouldn't be, you wouldn't just have Beto O'Rourke defeating Ted Cruz and no other Democratic wave, I think is the point you're making. It's all, these races are correlated. Good news is we don't have to wait that much longer. Early voting actually starts Monday, October 22nd. You can be damn sure that I will be reminding you that early voting starts in just 12 days. Okay, I've got another Politicon update. I hope we don't have to do this every day now, but yesterday I made the big announcement that in Los Angeles, not this weekend, but next weekend, I would be debating alongside Secular Talk's Kyle Kulinski against Turning Point USA's Candace Owens and Turning Point USA's Charlie Kirk, or possibly against Candace Owens and Dan, I think Dan Bongino. Yeah, Bongino, I'm sure. I forgot his first name was Dan. It has been so hectic. I have been put on and taken off of like 3 or 4 different things by Politicon. Kyle Kulinski was scheduled, as far as he knew, to debate Ann Coulter. That has since been canceled because Ann Coulter decided she doesn't want to do it. So I already have to sort of take a step back from what I told you yesterday. You know, this is so crazy. On Monday night at 11:30 p.m., I was texting with the Politicon people, and they said, we've got this debate for you on Sunday. And I said I was planning to fly home Sunday. I'll change my flight. Is this confirmed? Is this definitely happening? And they said, it's absolutely happening. You, Kyle, Candace, Charlie, Sunday at 3 p.m., something like that, Pacific time, go ahead and change your flight. And I did it. And Kyle and I yesterday were texting back and forth, and we noticed that that debate still wasn't listed on the Politicon website. And as of this morning, it still wasn't. So I decided to email Politicon and say, I'm wondering, given that I changed my flight, when you're going to list this thing on the website. And they said, well, we're listed as soon as the panelists confirm. To which I said, at 11:30 p.m. last night, you told me it's confirmed, change your flight. To which they said, oh yeah, the panel's confirmed. The panelists haven't confirmed though.
Yeah. And I think because they're calling it a panel, a conversation, a discussion,
they think they can just switch anybody in.
Yeah, because, you know, debate implies that you have to do some background research, you have to do a lot of preparation, and you certainly want to know your opponent a couple weeks ahead of time.
Yes.
But because they're using these other words, these code words, that allows them to get around it.
So, you know, there's a sort of obvious question, which is if it turns out that it's going to be David Pakman and Kyle Kulinski versus third stringers from the Daily Wire, for example, was that worth changing my flight when that's going to require me to miss a day of the show, which I take seriously every time that, I'm off? That's a decision that we make. We take it seriously, right? We pay our guest hosts. It's not just, hey, whatever, I'll just change my flight and not show up. So quite frankly, I don't know what's going on. I hope that Pakman and Kulinski versus Owens and Kirk is happening. Otherwise, I hope it's Owens and Bongino. Kulinski and Pakman versus unknown Daily Wired third stringers or something like that is very much less interesting to me, and I don't know what's going on at this point.
Imagine if like another organization did this, like the NFL. We thought that the Patriots were going to play the Bears Sunday at 3 o'clock, but instead they're playing the Lions Monday night. Like, you can't do that.
You can't do it. You can't do it. You shouldn't do it anyway. And I'm just telling you. So why am I telling you this today? If you went out and bought a ticket to fly to LA and bought a ticket to Politicon on the basis that I was participating in that debate, and I know people in our audience are doing that, and people in Kyle Kulinski's audience are doing that. They're traveling across the country for these events. Maybe you want to wait because the panel is confirmed, but the panelists, it's like when Trump said, what was it? The story is real, but the news is fake, or something like the reporting is real, but the news is fake, or something like that. It doesn't make any sense, right? The panel is confirmed.
It has to be one or the other. It doesn't, it doesn't make any sense.
Apology in advance if you booked a non-refundable ticket and this ends up not happening. We have a voicemail number. That number is 2192-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting question we got from the rare female caller to the voicemail line.
Hi, David. I was wondering about your viewer demographics. I've noticed that a great majority of your callers, both voicemails and live callers, are men.
Right.
I'm wondering if this is simply because women are less likely to call in, or if a majority of your viewers are men, and if most of them are, I mean, why do you think this is?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So listen, I don't know if female audience members are more or less likely to call than male audience members. What I do know is that our show and every show like this, the Young Turks, Secular Talk, The Majority Report with Sam Cedar, all these shows have disproportionately male audiences. I don't know what the answer is. I could speculate that men more than women watch political talk shows that are disproportionately on the internet. I think that from the emails we get, our radio audience is much more evenly split between men and women. But there is no question that our online, our podcast and YouTube audiences are overwhelmingly male. And it is something that we actually have more female listeners based on the demographic data that we get than most of the other shows I mentioned, by a little bit, not by a lot. And I don't know why that is. It may be the story choice. It may be something else. I don't know. But yeah, our show and others like it are significantly more than 50% male audiences.
It's probably fair to say that men in general are more into politics than women.
Really?
And I think you can back that up by looking at, what people major in college. Like, if you take a political science major, the vast majority of people in that major are men. And
do you know that for a fact?
Yeah, and the vast majority of people watching the show are male too. So maybe it has something to do with that.
Wow, I don't know about the truth of anything Pat just said, but assuming all of the underlying assertions are accurate and the data is accurate, your conclusion may be one that I could get behind. So is that enough caveats, since I have no idea for sure about that?
Yeah, but you have to protect yourself, right? Yeah. You have to have all the grounds covered, and I understand why you did that, but I think it's a fair point that I made.
Knowing nothing at all about the underlying data Pat's referencing, his conclusions on the basis of that data being true sound more or less precise to me, is what I think I would say. Great bonus show today. I don't have time to tell you about it, other than you can get the bonus show by either being a member or a patron. I'll speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.